Okay, now we are leaving the world of audio, kind of, because you have audio with camera, but we're entering the world of film, of cinema, camera and lighting. First thing we're going to talk about is coverage. And we'll be talking a lot about composition and shots and space and form and then eventually getting into color and light. But I like to start the conversation talking about coverage. What does it mean when you talk about covering a scene or covering a shot? So this is a lot of the terminology we're going to get across to you right now. All right, coverage. Coverage is a term that refers to shooting a scene from a variety of angles and distances so you will have the raw material necessary to edit the scene together into an interesting visual and emotional experience for the audience. What does that mean? It basically means when you're shooting a scene, when you're shooting a film, you as a filmmaker, as a director or producer, but generally we'll talk in terms of the director because they're the one that ultimately picks what shots are made. You are trying to get an emotion across, you're trying to get an idea across to your audience. And this is something that a lot of people who haven't studied film and video don't understand is that so much of the storytelling just comes from the visuals. Doesn't matter what they're saying. You can tell an extremely powerful scene and have an audience know exactly what's going on in someone's mind purely based off of how you shoot it. And even when they are talking, you can accentuate, you can elevate the situation to an audience for them to really grasp and understand what's happening based off of the coverage, based off of how you shoot the scene. And what it boils down to, and a lot of this is we're going to be talking about choices. Everything is a choice. All right. Now, when you're shooting coverage, each of the shots or individual angles requires a different setup. You may hear me refer to the word setup quite often. Now, a setup is literally within the name. It is setting up the equipment to get a shot. So you set up the equipment to get a shot. And this takes time, and time on a film set costs money, especially if you're talking Hollywood films. You're paying an actor, a million, sometimes $2 million a day to be sitting on your set. You don't want to waste time. You don't want to have any more days. Even on low budget films, if a crew can cost you between $5,000 to $10,000 a day, you don't want to go into overtime. You don't want to go into an extra day. So every time you set up a scene, it better be worth it. It better be worth that time. And what makes it time is that you're trying to get information across to your audience. It is important for your audience to see a angle, see a shot in a specific way. We'll talk a lot about how you do that as we move forward. Real quick example as we have this. First, I'll read what I have in here. Every time the camera is moved for a new setup, you need to ask yourself if this is the best camera angle for telling this part of the story. In other words, going back to what I said, is it worth it? Is it important for your audience to see it? Could you, in the example here, this is from the film Casablanca. It's a very classic scene at the end of the film. Humphrey Bogart is telling her that yes, we are in love, but you need to go off with your husband because it's more important for the war effort. And you could have the entire scene all in one take, all in one shot of the two of them talking, and all the information would get across. Your audience would hear them talking, and it could just be in one shot. However, that wouldn't be nearly as compelling, because what's happening in here is that we have our two shot giving information. He's saying, "You need to leave me." As she begins to realize that he's right, that she has to go away and forget about him, she now has much more of the screen time. Before, it was 50-50. They cared as much. Now she's about two-thirds of the screen in the second shot. And finally, in the last shot, when she realizes that he's correct, she takes up the entire screen. So these are three different setups. These are three setups, and each of them was a choice. Each of them took time to set up. Each of them, you're probably looking at about a half hour to an hour's worth of work each time. That's not counting the camera rolling. So that's a lot of time to put in for 3 different shots that you could have gotten just in your 2 shot here. But the director felt it was important because you go from them as an item, her realizing they need to go, and then ultimately she is alone. She's leaving him for good. So she's by herself in the frame. Now these are, you may say to yourself, well, that's too much. Why, are we reading too much into it? No, you're not. These are all definite choices by the director because these are all subtle psychological manipulations of an audience to help them go on the journey the character is going with. Because in this first frame, let me clear off these frames here. In this first frame, she doesn't know he's saying you have to leave. So she, in her mind, sees the 2 of them as being equal, being together. He says, no, you have to go away. She's realizing. She's slowly coming under the realization that, yes, this is a reality. And then, boom, this is a reality. She realizes, yes, he's right, and I'm going to be not with him anymore. So these all take us on a journey that the actor is going through. So these are all setups, these are all choices, and these are all decisions that the director must make. All right, now, as you're figuring out your coverage, you'll talk about coverage in terms of scenes, shots, and sequences. And it's important to know the difference between them. All right, so you must know understand the difference between scenes, shots, and sequences. So what are the differences? A scene is the exact location, and I would also add time where the action is happening. So a scene is the exact location and time where the action is happening. All right, a scene is an isolated moment within the story. All right, it's just a moment. When we're talking about a scene, we're talking about a moment. And I'll give some examples here in a few minutes. But when you're thinking of a scene, another way to look at it is a scene is a moment. It is a moment at a place and time within the story. A shot, on the other hand, is a single continuous angle of view that probably only shows one part of the action in the scene. Now, probably, as we'll see in a minute, is an important part here because you probably are only seeing one part of the scene. There are exceptions to everything I'm going to be telling you. Practically everything I'll be showing you, there are exceptions, but these are generalities. But when you're talking about a shot, though, is always going to be a single continuous angle of view. Understand me? A shot is always a single continuous angle of view. A shot is you start the camera when the director says action, and when the director says cut, you turn the camera off. Boom. That is all it is. Now you can have you take multiple shots, and those are called takes. We'll talk about those in a minute. Now, you may be thinking, well, if a scene is a moment, then what's the difference between a scene and a sequence? Right? Well, a sequence is a complete chapter of the story. All right? Because you can have multiple scenes that build up to a section of the story. 2 scenes can build up to a third moment. Those 2 scenes together create a sequence to get us to this third event. One good way to look at this, I like to think of, are chase scenes or car chases sometimes in movies. You'll have one scene where the bad guys see each other in the parking lot, and they both run to their cars. The bad guy runs into his car, the good guy runs into his car, and they peel out of the parking lot. That is one scene. That scene got us, in their cars and driving. Then we have another scene where they're racing down through the suburbs, spinning around corners. That is the suburb scene of the car chase sequence. They leave the suburbs, they go on the highway, and the bad guy gets run off a bridge. So that is a third scene where it's the highway portion of the chase, and the driver gets knocked off the bridge. That is, those three scenes together creates the car chase sequence. But there are multiple scenes that create a sequence. So a scene is a moment. A sequence is a collection of scenes that create a chapter to the story, or a section to the story. All right. Now, when you are filming these scenes and these sequences and shots, particularly with the shots, you will need to take what are called takes. Sometimes you need to take multiple takes. So when the shot is filmed, that is called a take. If the take is not good, then you will take a retake. Sometimes directors will take multiple takes just because they don't see something that they want, or sometimes the director will love what they got, but then what they want to see, what else can the actor bring to the table? The actor delivered everything the director was hoping for. Now the director wants to see what they didn't imagine. Some directors will have. Stanley Kubrick is famous for having hundreds of takes. His actors just go on and on and on and on to make them look exhausted if he wants them to look exhausted in the film. While other directors like Clint Eastwood is very famous for only doing one or two takes, depending on as long as they deliver everything right, he's happy. So it really depends on the director, and again, everything goes back to choice. Everything is a choice by the filmmaker. But going back to it, each one of those shots is a take, and then the director decides if you need more than one take, and those are called retakes. If you ever watch behind the scenes on films, you hear them, scene 1, 2A, take 1. Scene 1, 2A, take 2, take 3, take 4, take 47, whichever. That's what a take is. Now, going back to what I said, there are exceptions, and you can combine and mix things around. As I said earlier, a sequence typically consists of several scenes, and a scene typically consists of several shots. Going back to our car chase, the car chase was several scenes that build up the sequence, and you could argue that there could be multiple shots within each of those scenes. Like going back to the parking lot, you have maybe a wide shot of the parking lot. You go to a close-up of the bad guy coming out of the store. Cut to a medium shot of the good guy pulling up in his car, seeing the bad guy. So you could break it down into multiple shots to create that scene, and that scene then goes into the greater car chase sequence. However, any combination is possible. It is possible for a sequence to have just one scene, and even for more than one sequence to happen in a single scene. So you could have a scene where the whole piece happens in one shot, but there are multiple things that happen that generates a sequence. It could be one single shot. Before I go into an example of that, I want to elaborate a little bit more on the breakdown of this. I'm going to show you a scene. This is actually a student film made by students at Cincinnati State. And this is a scene, this right here is a scene where this couple gets engaged. And so we have multiple shots and then looking back and forth, talking about how much they love each other, and they're engaged. And you get close up the ring. It's multiple shots happening in this scene of them getting engaged. In a moment here, I'm going to fast forward. In a moment here, the engagement scene ends, and he suddenly sees over her shoulder a person that looks like it needs his help. For some reason, he wants to go over and help this person. This is now a new scene because everything that needed to happen in that previous scene of them getting engaged was done. We're in a new scene where he's seeing something and he needs to get up and go. He convinces his now fiancée he needs to go and get up and see what's happening. So he gets up and goes to check on this other person. Now, those first two scenes, the engagement scene and the scene saying he needs to go and check on this person, you could say then that is the table sequence. And now we're entering a new scene on a bench, which will become the bench sequence. And then in the bench sequence, he learns a number of things, talks back and forth with his character. Don't want to give the story away. But long story short, he's convinced to leave his fiancée. So we have the bench scene, which is also its own sequence. He gets up and goes. Now we are in a whole new scene where he leaves his fiancée. So we had the table sequence at the beginning. So we had the table sequence that had two scenes. And then we had bench scene, which is also a sequence. I'm just going to call it SEQ for now. And then the leaving scene. Which is also a sequence. So we had a sequence with two scenes followed by two more scenes that were sequences in themselves. Only was one scene. Hopefully this isn't too confusing, but that's how you break things down. Multiple scenes can be a sequence, or a sequence and a scene can just be in and of themselves one. Now, another example. There are times when in a film directors get experimental. And there was a film by a fantastic director by the name of Alfred Hitchcock called Rope. And it was an experimental film by him. And in that film, it's an entire 90-minute film that is designed to look like it's one single shot. It's actually maybe three cuts that you can kind of notice within the film, but overall it's meant to look like it's one continuous take over the course of the film. And there have been other films that have tried doing that. And in that film, it's one shot, one take, but there are multiple scenes happening, multiple sequences happening. So again, this is all sort of combining. You can mix all these things, but when it comes right down to it, if you're talking about a shot, you're talking about one shot, camera coming on, camera turning off. You're talking about a scene, you're talking about a moment, you're talking about a sequence, you're talking about a chapter of story. But you can mix all of them together because you can have one continuous shot telling a whole chapter of a story. You can have multiple shots covering a scene, which is in that moment, or you can tell that moment all in one shot. A very famous example of this is in the movie Goodfellas, and then opening scene to Touch of Evil. I'm not going to show you the Touch of Evil scene, but I'll show you a little bit here of the Goodfellas scene just to explain how you actually have multiple scenes which build the whole walking into the restaurant sequence. Let's go ahead and take a look at it here. Let me get back up. Go away. There we go. It's a long take. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here. So it starts with this close-up of him handing off money. They walk across the street. It's all going to be one shot. So it's one shot, one take, but multiple scenes creating this whole long sequence of them entering the restaurant. So this is the scene of them walking across the street. Now we're entering a new scene of them going into the hallway. And he'll talk to a bunch of folks in the hallway. He tips everybody. If you haven't seen Goodfellas, I highly recommend it. Fantastic film. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Now he enters the kitchen. So we're entering the kitchen scene. Still all one take, but multiple scenes because they're different moments that we're following. Just walking through. I'm going to jump ahead again a little bit to get them out of the kitchen. And now they're walking into the restaurant or the supper club. And here in a minute, we're actually going to leave them and follow a table. So this is going to be a new scene, the table scene happening. But it all adds up to be they're entering the restaurant sequence. It's all one shot. So what it all boils down to is that it's all choices. These are all choices that a director makes. Other choices, there's a wonderful movie called Stranger Than Paradise, and the sequences are single scenes. So they have basically each sequence in the film, each chapter in the film takes place in one scene, and every scene is filmed in a single shot. So it's just a lot of very long takes, cut one after the other. Everything's a choice. Everything generates a different feel. And it's all about how the director wants the audience to experience these stories. There are countless ways to tell every story, and it's all about making the decision. I don't want to say the best decision, but it's the best decision for you as picking your story. Best decision for that director to tell the story that they want to get it across to an audience. That's it for now. Thanks.